Hi, my name is David Bose. I'm the Communications and Marketing Director for Washington Policy Center, and this is our episode of Washington Policy on the Go, where every other week we bring you the latest from our research directors and sometimes from special guests regarding what's happening in state policy right here in Washington State. During the legislative session, it's every week because there's so much going on. We can't pack it all in for every other week. It's too urgent, too fast. But outside of the legislative session, it's every other week with a few exceptions for holidays. But all you have to do is go to the events page at washingtonpolicy.org and you'll see the Washington Policies on the go. You can subscribe, you can get updates and reminders for when these events take place on a regular basis as well. And then, of course, if you miss one, we have them uploaded to our YouTube channel shortly after the event. So by tomorrow, for example, today's episode will be on our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search for Washington Policy, or better yet, go to our website and you just click straight through at washingtonpolicy.org. Today, we'll be speaking first with our small business director and then with our director of transportation. Mark Harmsworth is going to join us now. Mark, you've had a number of blogs of late, but let's start with the one that hits the pocketbook the hardest, or potentially could hit the pocketbook the hardest, and that is the possible charge or the presented charge for every package that is delivered. Why don't you describe, first of all, where that recommendation came from and what it would look like?
Yeah, thanks for having me on today, Dave. I appreciate it. So the Joint Transportation Committee, actually technically the transportation committees in the Washington legislature, set a study up to start looking at delivery fees on packages, and they sent this out, and a consulting company responded, and they came back and presented their results of their studies to the Joint Transportation Committee, and that's a joint meeting of both the Senate and House committees. And what they were looking at is, do they think adding a delivery fee to everything that we mail orders, so start thinking about Amazon or eBay or insert your favorite online store here. And they were looking at fees between 25 and 75 cents per delivery. So you can imagine what that would do to the cost right now. I mean, I'm personally a Prime member and I enjoy the free, if you like, shipping that comes to me. But they would add that in. So all the products, I mean, there's only really one solution to actually covering the cost of this fee is to increase prices or tag it on there. If you're still wanting to have free shipping, then the only way to recover this fee is to increase the price of the product invisibly. Now, of course, the legislature is probably going to put a caveat in there if they go down this road, that they will want to call that out on the billing. And certainly if I was an online person, a company, I would certainly do that too and put that on there. Other states have tried this, Colorado, for example, and they've had a lot of backlash from both consumers and in fact, one of the co-sponsors of the original legislation is making some significant changes because of the impact that it's had on the online delivery industry. So and yet the transportation chair of the Senate, a Democrat, Senator Marco Elias, has said that they need this money for infrastructure. But at the end of the day, the transportation budget, and I'm sure our transportation expert, Charles, will talk about this a little bit later, but they've got plenty of money. Now, understanding that Sound Transit, where they spend the majority of the transportation dollars that are spent in the state, represents a very small number of trips. It's about priorities at the end of the day. So a lot of these initiatives to increase these fees to add more money to the state's coffers really are not necessary if they were to focus on the things that need to be fixed. In our case right now, we have a significant pothole problem in the state, and our roads are in terrible condition because of the inability for the state legislature to allocate money to the WashDOT Department of Transportation to actually fix our roads. So this is about priorities. This fee, I think, is just a money grab. It sort of circumvents sales tax, obviously, and ultimately the consumers in Washington State will end up paying.
So just to be clear, if you had a 75 cent or 25 cent, either way, the charge per delivery or package, per package, not per delivery, it'd be possible for the consumer to never see it, right? Because if they order it, it's Amazon or whomever's delivering it, paying it on the back end. So it's that hidden kind of fee. It's kind of like it's like the carbon tax in that way, and the cap and trade tax taxes the fuel coming in for carbon, and then your prices go up for gasoline, but technically you're not paying that
Mm.
that tax. Somebody else is paying the tax, then forwarding the cost onto you. Is that about right?
Yeah, and imagine if you were going through that checkout process and you'd selected free shipping, and then you see a 25 or 75 cent state transportation fee. Well, you're going to question, well, this really wasn't free shipping. I'm having to pay 25 cents or 75 cents to the state. And, and you say, well, it's only 25 cents. But as with all things government, when they create something, they're always going to increase it. In fact, the other states that have done this have increased their fees. And you can see this start creeping up over the years. It's circumvention of the sales tax. I think it's a very insidious way of taxing online purchases, and ultimately, the point that can be made is that an Amazon truck or an online delivery truck that's delivering 30 or 40 parcels to homes is taking 30 or 40 drivers off the road that would have been going to a store to purchase. I'm not advocating either way about store or online purchasing. That's a different argument. But arguably, you could say that they're actually reducing the amount of wear and tear on the road. So for them to do this, I just think it's a very insidious way of doing it. Now, it could be that this legislature ultimately, if it decides to go down this road, puts provisions in the legislation that say it has to be called out on checkout. I don't know how that's going to play out. You've seen this in restaurants where they've added the surcharge fees and people's reaction to it at the gas pump. When you see those stickers on the gas pump that tell you about how much tax is being added to your gas, it's sort of more transparent. I don't know what they're going to do with this. And this really is a study at this point, but with all studies, that's where it starts.
Yeah, I was about to. You beat me to the punch. These kinds of studies tend to be the foot in the toe in the water to see what the public's reaction is and what the reaction is in terms of support for the policy, to see if they can get it through. And you bring up a good point, which is that state funds are fungible and that they can move them around based on the priorities that they set. So when someone says, for example, we need this money to fix potholes, it's because they've chosen not to fix the potholes with the other money that's there. That said, let's just say that that everything else was running at top efficiency and there was no money for potholes. What are the odds of the money for this actually going strictly for road maintenance, in your view?
Well, the 18th Amendment of the Washington State Constitution talks about gas taxes, and that gas tax has to be used for road maintenance and other activities. It's been stretched over the years. You've seen on-ramps that are bus only, or they were built originally for cars. And so the drivers have been out paying for those. But there's no such protection on these fees, which is why, the folks that are grabbing for additional money down in Olympia like fees like this, because they're not subject to that 18th Amendment. So it can be moved to whatever fund they want. Initially it may go into an account within the transportation budget, if you like, but there's no real restriction here. And it takes one piece of legislation or one overeager legislator to decide, it'd be great if we use this money for XYZ instead of ABC, and that money can be moved. Very similar to a lot of the other money in Washington State. But the 18th Amendment protects its gas taxes, which have to be used for the road maintenance side of things. So if you really wanted to go down this road, then they can allocate the money they're spending in other areas back to roads. And, I'm sure Charles will bring some more clarity on how much is not being spent on maintenance. I know Secretary Roger Millar has been talking about it for years, about how much we've been short. When I was in the legislature in 2018, I think the number was around 7 billion backlog. I'm sure it's a lot larger now.
Let's switch gears a little bit, although it's somewhat related. And you had a blog about a Snohomish County individual was trying to start her own business with a food truck, and what delayed it was permitting. It's not that she had a dirty kitchen or had any problems. She had new equipment and all this, trying to start a business, but the wait was extraordinary. Why don't you describe, what's happening there in the way?
Yeah, so excuse me, here in Snohomish County, I guess the Snohomish County Health Department is a little short-staffed, and at least that's the excuse that we were given for this. Well, this gal decided to leave her job and start her dream business, and she purchased one of these larger food trucks. You've seen them on the side of the road, selling sandwiches and hot food and whatnot. These things are actually pretty expensive. She put about $100,000 into this thing, and then went to get all of her permits as part of that, so she could start selling food. Well, it turns out that she ended up waiting 5 months to get her permit, and the interim, in order to, and you can imagine spending all that money being out of work and then not being able to actually generate any income. And so she's ended up having to apply for temporary permits, so that she, at the cost of several $1,000s, so that she could operate her food business. And the question came, well, the first question is, why is it taking this long? This is ridiculous. The second thing is, if she can get a temporary permit, then why couldn't they have issued the permanent permit? There's some inspections there, and it's been suggested that maybe she could have started operating on all food trucks, and in many cases can start operating under a temporary permit and then get inspected at some point for the things that the county wants to make sure are happening, and then they get signed off and they're good to go. And if they're not, they can make corrections, or they get shut down if they're not doing it right. And it sort of brings up the question, particularly after COVID, is a lot of these permits and a lot of the things that happened during COVID were suspended, with no ill effect. I think about Andy's Fish House up in Snohomish. They're fighting the city of Snohomish right now over their outdoor seating area, which is a covered canopy. Totally fine during COVID, but somehow now it's not. And so you end up with the bureaucrats in municipal governments like counties and cities, sort of following the letter of the law down to the T, not understanding that these guys are just trying to do the right thing. We're not talking about the outrageous or egregious violations of health code or anything like that, building codes, but they're trying to do the right thing. And the counties and the cities are coming down on these guys. Maybe it's time we start looking at these regulations, maybe in the case of the health case here, that they can approve some of these things if the city or the municipality doesn't get to it in time. And we can get these businesses out there actually generating income, making jobs, and bringing our economy back.
This reminded me a great deal of a speech given by Mitch Daniels, the governor of Indiana, at a Washington Policy Center event several years back, where he talked about when he took office, those who were running the Department of Licensing, for example, were kind of happy about all the fines that they had delivered, and same with the Department of Labor and Industries. They were stopping people from doing business because they saw their job as to fine people rather than seeing their job as to help people get started, right? And so, when I saw the story about the woman with the truck, you're assuming she's got new equipment, new stuff. I'm with you. There's countless people who start cooking in their kitchen every day and have friends and cook for people and do just fine. Seems like you could give people that temporary permit, let them operate until the inspection comes, and you could have some harsh penalties for the things that are most dangerous. Like, if people aren't washing their hands, for example, that's a big fine, that's a big problem. You're going to be shut down until you can prove yourself correct. But for the most part, they should be trying to, 5 months is absurd to get somebody to start, a food truck business, because it should all be, you can learn this stuff online. They can have a video step-by-step process of how to do things and make things happen quickly, I would think. So
yeah, imagine that you had borrowed that $100,000.
Oh.
So you lose your job, or you quit your job to start the business. I'm sure you've invested your time and sweat into it, and now you're making payments with no income. And then the county comes along and says, you need to wait here, or you can pay several $1,000s more to operate your business. Kind of ludicrous at the end of the day. And there's definitely somewhere, I think there's some streamlining that needs to happen there. And obviously for the county, maybe they need a few more folks to help out.
Now, I know this was a while back, but I thought since I have you on, I'd ask you about it anyway. You also, based on your experience in the legislature and dealing with public record documents, you had a blog recently about reminding the legislature that they too are subject to open records. And I just wanted you to kind of share your perspective on that and tell us what the controversy is, so to speak.
Yeah, and the legislature, and I'll say this right up front, and I always say this, I am fully supportive of transparency in the legislature. When I was there, I released all of my records to public records requests unless it contained sensitive information about children and social security numbers and so on. And I was one of the very few legislators that did that at the time. In fact, I did get a request for my entire mailbox, and I don't recall who it was from. And I gave it to the attorney, and it took them 6 months, but they got it done eventually. And that information was released. And I absolutely believe that. There are folks in the legislature who believe that there are activities that the legislature performs that should be hidden from the public because maybe they're some kind of, I mean, you talk about contract negotiations, which under the PRA is already covered. If you're a municipality, you know, there's several reasons you can go into executive session where which is the time when the council or whoever will meet privately. You can think about land purchases, contract negotiations, potential litigation, and performance of a public employee. Those are legitimate reasons to have a private conversation amongst the leadership to figure out what needs to happen. But ultimately, what they decide is then put out into the public domain. Now, the legislature thinks that some of these discussions can happen and then that never gets released, including their emails and their calendars. And that's just flat out wrong. There's nothing that the legislature, and I'm speaking from my own experience, there's nothing in the emails that I had that the public doesn't have a right to see. You know, I may have a side conversation with somebody in the aisles on the floor or something, and we have a discussion, but ultimately any decisions are made in the public domain. And that's the way it should be. So for some legislators to push and say, no, there's areas in which we're special and you shouldn't know, that is just a basic violation of the public trust. And I believe that is not right. And they should be subject to the Public Records Act, just like every other elected official.
And it becomes difficult, even more difficult when people they slow roll the outlay. Seems like some of that could be taken care of just by putting it online automatically, just by saying blanket, hey, this is all going online, you know, like this show. We're recording it and we're gonna post it on YouTube afterwards so everyone can see it. And if we screw up, it's gonna be there, you
Right.
know. So
And there's agencies, companies that, well, the big issue with a lot of the emails is that sensitive information. Like
yeah.
if I got something from DSHS and it was some custody case with children, then obviously you don't want that information exposed, the name of the kids and what have you. So, but there are companies out there that do redaction, and they can go through this. You only need to redact these things once, post it on an online searchable, like a Nexus, Lexis type of thing, database that both the press and the public can get to. And so this is perfectly doable. It's just making it happen. And with the advancements in AI that we've seen over the last few years, I'm sure somebody's thinking about, I hope somebody's thinking about this, that they can publish this stuff online and make it a searchable database. And I think that'll be great for everybody.
That's exactly what I was thinking with AI's advances. Not only to speed up the redaction process, I would think, but also just to make it more searchable and easier to find.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, appreciate your time today. I won't hold you any longer, but thanks for sharing that information for us, and hopefully we'll get some, you know, some added attention to streamlining regulations so people can pursue their happiness.
Thanks,
You
David.
bet. Thanks.
Bye.